this, as Leslie just mentioned, is our second in a series of 3 webinars that we're hosting, Go Low Carbon, in collaboration with Cumbria Chamber of Commerce. The first session last week, I know a few of you, I think, were at, and if you're watching this recorded, you may have seen that one too, was on energy by Ryan. We have the recording of that session if you do want to watch that and catch up from last week. This week isn't a follow-on, it is a different topic, but you might find it interesting nonetheless. And then our last session, final one in this series, will be on solar solutions, which Ryan will host this time next week. So I'm just admitting one more person. I'll share my screen now and then I'll get started.
Yeah, so these are the ones we've already added. So,
so I think the question is the certificates we have provided. So there was one certificate.
I'll just ask everybody to mute if they're not speaking, please.
Yeah.
We can hear somebody in the background.
Perfect. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. Perfect. Yeah, so hopefully everybody can see this first slide. Someone please just shout up if you can't, just let me know. As I said, welcome to this webinar series. I'm Elspeth Parks. I'm the carbon consultant at Go Low Carbon. My colleague Ryan is also Go Low Carbon. So I'm going to host this week, as I said, Ryan will host next week. So starting with today's agenda, I'm going to run through quickly who we are, Go Low Carbon. I'm going to debug some phrases around carbon, which for some of you might be stuff you know where we're all on the same page. Also, there is sometimes a lot of miscommunication about carbon reporting, and it's nice to know that we're using the right phrases and we can be confident in what we do know and what we are saying. Through I measure our footprint as businesses, no matter which kind of sector you're in or what kind of business you have. It's really important to understand your carbon footprint, and because all of you are here, I already know that you care about the environment and you care about the social aspect. So we'll run through the why. We'll run through what's included in a carbon audit. So carbon audits that Go Low Carbon provide, I'll run you through what we do and what we can help your business with. And then I'll talk a little bit about added benefit. I'll talk a bit further about that too. Perfect. So who are Go Low Carbon? So we're 3-pronged really. We have 3 departments. We are based in Carlisle, and these are the 3 main things we focus on. So firstly, we're an energy brokerage. So we help secure cheap green energy contracts for businesses. And we've got a whole team that work on that. Like I said, last week's webinar was on everything to do with energy. Ryan hosted that, and we've got the recording if you are interested. Carbon audits is what I focus on, what I do. We'll talk more about this today. And then the final bit of our consultancy, which we think makes us unique, is we can also run you through the solutions. So from the outcome of a carbon audit, we can run you through the what next. What can you do? Solutions that will actively help your business. Part of that is solar, which Ryan will cover in the session next week. I'd love to invite you to put any questions in the chat. I don't know if I can see the chat actually, but I think Ryan should be able to see it, or Leslie will be able to see it, and we can gather those questions throughout. And then we can answer those at the end. There'll be opportunities for a Q&A at the end as well. And you are very welcome to have your cameras on. Sometimes it's weird just to talk to a screen of blank faces. So if you're happy having your camera on, that's always lovely, but not mandatory at all. So you're all here, and I all think you'll probably be invested in this already, but the climate crisis affects everyone. So whether or not you are a large business or a small business, it's our ethos that everybody has a social responsibility and a crucial role to play in protecting the planet and protecting the environment. So not only as a business, you should care, there's also your customers to think about, your supply chains, everybody that works for you, directly or indirectly, stakeholders in your business. They expect action from you in 2022. We see this more and more and more. But the issue is, as the Federation of Small Businesses quote says on the side of this slide, 69% of SMEs don't know how to measure their carbon emissions that their business produces. But that's why we're here, and that's why we're here to help. So the next few slides, and forgive me if this is obvious to some of you, or you know this already, but I thought I would run through some phrase debunking. There's two phrases that are really thrown about nowadays and sometimes not used in the right contexts. And I think in the context of carbon auditing, they're really important to understand. So I'm going to very briefly and hopefully quite simply run through the definitions of carbon neutral versus net zero. So carbon neutral targets, to hit those you can purchase carbon reduction credits equivalent to the emissions that have been released. So that's without the need for emissions reductions to have taken place. So that's without the need to take any steps to reduce your emissions. You can buy carbon reduction offsets and claim something to be carbon neutral. That's a very simple definition, and I'll run through kind of nuances of that in the next slide. But to claim to be net zero, you need to be reducing your emissions in line with the latest climate science, which has come out of the last COP meetings. We need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C. Once you've done that and you've taken those steps, you can then balance those remaining residual emissions through carbon removal credits. So you can offset the remainder of the credits, but only through specific measures. So this slide here gives you a little bit more of an idea. It's a little bit technical and a little bit of a broad overview, but again, I think this is really important in terms of the carbon auditing context. So I have tried to make it as simple as possible. And if anyone had any questions at the end, I'm happy to run through it. But very, very briefly, the difference between carbon neutral and net zero. Carbon neutral will measure just the direct emissions, scopes 1 and scopes 2. I'll run through what those are in just a second. So just direct emissions, not your indirect emissions, scope 3, whereas net zero encompasses everything. Carbon neutral, if you're making that claim, it allows for emissions to be created with no specified level of reduction required, whereas there's a very specific reduction level required. That's the Science Based Targets Initiative, SBTI, in the net zero standards. So specifically, if you're following net zero standards, there's specific targets that you have to hit. It's not the case with carbon neutral. Carbon offsetting, there's different types. So for carbon neutral offsetting, you can use carbon reduction or removal projects. Whereas net zero, you can only use carbon removal projects that actually take CO2 out of the atmosphere. An example of that would be using matured ecosystems as a carbon removal or carbon removal tech. There's only one international standard really for carbon neutrality, which is past 2060, which I know we've got a variety of sectors on this call. So for some sectors, such as quarries or heavier industries, past 2060 is an international standard that people are starting to ask for in like tender documents, but that covers carbon neutrality. Whereas for everybody else, if you're working towards science-based targets, there's a corporate net zero standard for that. You can claim that a product or a service of yours is carbon neutral. So example, if you were like a drinks manufacturer and you wanted one of your products to be certified carbon neutral, that is something that you could do. Whereas net zero really is talking about entire organisations. And carbon neutral arguably is just more in the shorter term, whereas these net zero targets, because they're science-based, are looking forward into the future. So they have longer term goals, whether that's very ambitious 2030 goals or the 2050 kind of government standard, which most industries are being bound by at the moment. So I appreciate that's really, really in depth, but I think for some of you it's probably quite relevant. And as I said, these phrases just get bandied about occasionally, even by certain politicians at certain wide events. People are using these phrases incorrectly. So again, yeah, very brief. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. But to go back to that first point, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and what they are, when we come in to do a carbon audit for you, we will break down your scopes as such. So scope 1 is the direct emissions that your business produces. So it's two things really. If you've got company owned vehicles or you're using gas for like heating and burning fuel, that is all in scope 1. So scope 1 is essentially gas. Scope 2 is indirect emissions from electricity. So if we were doing a very simple carbon audit or energy audit, we could just look at scope 1 and scope 2. But if you are going for net zero targets, you really need to be including scope 3, which is this last bit, all other indirect emissions. So scope 3 is usually the largest emitter for anyone, even for smaller businesses. This can be the largest portion of your footprint because this literally covers everything else. Business travel, employee commuting, if all of your employees are driving in. Yeah, business travel if you're taking flights or you're taking longer haul journeys. Anything logistical, anything to do with supply chains, water, waste, all of that falls within scope 3. So what's the benefit to your business beyond that central pillar, which is planet, understanding, managing and reducing your footprint? And like we mentioned before, you've also got the people aspect. You've got customers, current and future employees, stakeholder supply chains, also tender documents. For certain industries, you might be finding that you need to declare what your footprint is in order to not lose work and go for specific tenders. And then the other side, which is the profit side, we found in audits that we've done, there's tangible financial savings just from completing a carbon audit. We can come in and do quite a low cost audit, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, and we can talk specifically to you and your business. But there's return on investment that can be calculated on these as well. And it'll also keep you up to speed with legislation. So it'll mean that there's no fines, depending what industry you're in, etc. We can keep you up to date with all of that beyond that central pillar of protecting the planet. So this text is quite small, but I can read through all of this for you. And if you are wanting to know more about our process and specifically how we do carbon audits, I'm going to give an overview now, but we can always give you more in-depth information about what we would do for you. But we like to think of the carbon audit process as a large cycle. So the first stage being right at the top, commitment. Making a pledge to understanding and reducing your emissions as a company, as a business. That's the first stage, and you're all on this call now, and I know that you all care about this because you're finding out more information already. So that is stage 1. which I would say is the hardest stage to decide and shout that you're going to commit and do something. The next stage is to actively measure. So conducting the audit with Go Low Carbon's help. So we would sit down with you as a business and work out what information we need to calculate your scope 1, your scope 2, and then which relevant emissions fall under scope 3 for you. So scope 3 can look really different depending the sector that you're in. For example, if you are a hotel, laundry might fall under scope 3, and that's very specific to your sector. But we're here to tell you what needs to fall under which category, and what we can measure, and what we can help you reduce. So once we've got all of that information, we will calculate your footprint. We'll usually do a site visit too, again, depending on the type of business you are, how small you are. If you've got multiple sites, we can work that into our pricing structure and into what we would recommend for you. The next stage, once you've got that full report, is reducing your footprint. So making, again, that pledge to understand and reduce your emissions as a company. The next stage, moving into behaviour changes. We want you to actually implement all of these solutions and the things that we can find. Usually this starts with behaviour changes, and you can start those immediately with zero cost within your company, and then we can work with you on return of investment for other solutions. Once again, I won't touch on solutions too heavily this week, because Ryan's going to run through a very specific solution, solar, next week, and we are on hand for questions if you have questions about that further. And then finally, openly communicate. You need to update your stakeholders, employees, customers, peers. We really think it's important that you lead by example and you make public commitments and targets that you can track. And the benefit of doing this with a dedicated carbon consultant, with a dedicated business, is you'll be able to communicate with confidence. As I was saying earlier, with showing you the difference between carbon neutral and net zero, there's so much misinformation sometimes, and you can be, as a business, sometimes afraid of greenwashing or saying the wrong thing. We're here to tell you what you can and can't say. Essentially, we can tell you exactly the claims that you can make, so you have that confidence to communicate everything that you're doing and the positive work that you're doing and the commitment that you've made. And then the last stage is to repeat. Go back into that cycle and repeat again and again. Make another commitment based on your findings the year after and work towards those targets. Have science-based targets set that you can work towards and you can shout about, and then we just keep that cycle going and going. I've added this slide in. This is quite technical again, but it is a question that we do get occasionally. Just so very quickly, for anybody that is interested, we do get asked what the difference between ESOS, so the energy saving opportunity scheme, versus SECR, which is the streamlined energy and carbon reduction commitments, versus what a carbon audit is. Once again, ESOS, SECR are kind of bounded around as phrases, and sometimes people don't fully understand what either of those mean. This is a very general overview of how we think our carbon audit compares to both of these. So these tend to be for larger businesses. ESOS definitely is for much larger organisations. So again, depending who you are and where you've come from, this may or may not be relevant. But the frequency of a carbon audit, as you can see from this table, is updated a lot more frequently and can keep you a lot more on track. ESOS and SECR really just focus on energy use, those scope 1 and scope 2, whereas carbon audit, you can go a lot further and you can look into those scope 3s, which again is usually the bulk of emissions. Target creation, there is some target creation in the SECR, but for a carbon audit, there's also that target creation that can be very specific, either net zero overall business or maybe a carbon neutral product within that as well. Identifying solutions, We can be very specific in a carbon audit. So site-specific costed solutions, return on investment projections. We can help you with practical implication. We don't just give you a report and then that report sits on a shelf and then you ask them like a year later, like, what did we do about the report that we were given, or were we meant to have any action, or what steps were we meant to take? We're here as a consultancy for ongoing support and advice. The value we think in a carbon audit is a lot higher because it will lead to financial savings that are a lot greater than the small cost of a carbon audit. And then in terms of marketing, we have useful marketing tools. We've got an accreditation logo that you can work towards. And like I said, we can run you through what you can and can't say, phrases and things that you can say on social media, claims you can make about your business, its carbon footprint, and again, if it's relevant, maybe certain products as well. So I appreciate that slide is not for everybody. However, again, another little debunk of phrases that do tend to be banned about in this space, or I see on LinkedIn a lot used incorrectly, etc. So what would an inclusions for a carbon audit look like? So at the start of, again, the process, like I said, we would sit down with you as a business and work out what is mandatory and what is optional. You'll see the first 3 lines here, all of those mandatory scopes. So the scope 1s and the scope 2s, and then followed by all of those optional things. So some of the things I mentioned before, water, waste, business travel, commuting, and we would work out very specifically what that means for your business. And what is relevant for your sector. And the next few slides are what we provide and what you would receive from us if you do a carbon audit with Go Low Carbon. So, starting at the top, we aim to give you a comprehensive understanding of your carbon footprint. Not only do we want to give you a clear breakdown of your carbon footprint, but we want to give you it per activity, per all those scopes, also per site if you have multiple sites. We want you to really find the value in a report and really understand, not just be looking at a report that's very dense, maybe very technical. We put a lot of work into making sure that everybody can understand the reports that we create. And following on from that, we'll present everything and give it the opportunity for you to ask questions, and also follow up with check-ins throughout a year. We usually do start with a financial year for most companies, and then we'll work out the emissions per financial year and we'll keep you on track throughout. So if you've got an end of financial year report as a company, this is something that you can start adding to it as well. Importantly, we'll give you clarity on actions and solutions. So we'll be able to give you tailored advice, fully costed solutions, return on investment projections, and that ongoing advice and support from our team. We'll give you support in creating a carbon reduction plan. Thirdly, this will satisfy any regulatory requirements, difficult word, that you have. Maybe that comes in the form of tenders, again, depending on the sector that you're in, but that's something that we're able to provide for you. Again, confidence in communicating comes up, we can give you an engagement and a marketing pack so you can avoid any accusations of greenwashing, any claims that aren't correct. We can give you accreditation, so third-party verification and certification. And then finally, we can look, once you've done all of those steps and we've really hit your net zero targets, you've got a plan to go ahead, you've made that commitment to make reductions, we can then look at offsetting. So offsetting the residual amount of emissions. We have projects that we support, projects that would support carbon removal and that side of the net zero commitments. So that's the absolute final stage, and we can look at that for your business as well. Just a little bit more, because it's nice. We're very proud of what we've created, and it's nice as a business to actually have a forum to like shout about what we do for once. So forgive me if this is overkill, but we know, because we've studied this market, we know that we have a low entry price. So we work on a subscription model, which, as far as we're aware, most people do not. So we've got a one-off setup fee and then a monthly subscription, because we're keeping you up to date throughout the year, and we will update what your carbon footprint is and that tracker, and keep you on track, and be able to help you and guide you throughout the year as consultants. That's the way that we structure this. We also think that it's nice to have an ongoing relationship, because that is what carbon reduction is about. It's not about just paying thousands of pounds for one report that then gets left on the shelf and we don't work through those solutions together. So that is why we have the subscription model we do. This is very bespoke depending on basically the size of business that you have and the sites that you have. We're always very, very happy to chat through individually with people costs and how much it would look like for you. Again, depending on the sector and size of business. Collectively, we've got a lot of expertise within our team. Like I said at the start, we run over energy brokerage, carbon auditing, and all of the solution side as well. That does include solar. So collectively, we have years of experience in all of these areas. All of the methodology that we use is in line with international standards. Again, without getting too technical, there's a couple of international standards that you can pay, depending on sector, you can pay to get like certified in, but there's not kind of one leading standard. There is kind of a few. They all very much say the same thing, but by doing a carbon audit that includes methodology from all of them and has you covered from all of the international standards, that is why we use the methodology that we do. Return on investment, as I said, we fully cost all projections, and then marketing I run through as well. We can support you with that. So as a nice summary, hopefully that wasn't too technical, and we do have loads of time for questions now if anyone does have questions to ask. But the key points from us, we as a consultancy, we really want you to understand your footprint, and we think it's important to get expert help in order to calculate your emissions, and not just for doing that first step, but following through. So number 2, reducing your impact and actually knowing which solutions are viable for you right now, also the best solutions for your business going forward. And then also thirdly, confidently communicating what your successes have been and continue to be, we think is a massive stage in the carbon auditing process. So yeah, as it says on the screen, please yeah, to keep up to date, you can follow us on any of the social medias that are below. If you want to drop your email into the chat, I can sign you up for our newsletter if that's something that you would like to be added to. But yeah, we have lots of times for questions, so if anybody does have anything specific they would like to ask, please unmute yourself, maybe take your camera off if you like, but also we're monitoring the chat, so you can put anything in the chat that you want as well.
I know I've got some questions actually. I'll give it a minute and see if anyone else. Oh yeah, there's a question actually come through from Julie. I'll let you other people ask first.
Perfect. I can't actually view the chat right now, so if there is anything in it, if someone can read it out.
So I'll read the question out then, if that's okay. So Julie's asking, is the cost dependent on the size of the business, i.e. the number of employees or square footage, etc.?
Yeah, it largely is, isn't it, Ryan? Because we do this very bespoke per business. It's still very low cost in comparison to other other competitors that we've seen that ask for a lump sum upfront. But it is bespoke depending on usually the number of sites. Ryan, if that's accurate to say?
Yeah, I think there's it depends on the complexity. if it's a vastly complex number of sites across the country, across the world, then it's one thing. If it's relatively local, then we're looking at things like energy usage, travel, transport, and waste. At the same time, we can extend it out, and it might be that we have all sorts of requests from people who want to understand the carbon footprint of a product or a particular service, which is obviously quite a niche body of work. So we can split that out and look at individual projects separately. There is potential that some of this stuff might be, for certain projects, there is an element of potential access to some subsidies as well, or grant funding for that, which we can help signpost people in the direction of. But what, as you said there, Elspeth, a key feature is the fact that we're obviously in a very tough financial situation at the moment as a country, and businesses are feeling the pressure. And by having a model which is on a subscription basis, not only keeps people engaged throughout the year, so this isn't a one-off exercise that's forgotten about. The really key thing is, if your carbon footprint's 50 tonnes or 500 tonnes, it's about, so what? What can you do about it? Where's the pragmatic element of actually turning that into an action plan and having someone hold your hand through there to say, okay, in 3 months' time, we're going to be looking at this project or reviewing a new service or technology. And by having it as a monthly subscription, not only does it keep us engaged and honest right the way through, but also for most of our clients, it will actually cash flow this. And we actually fund ourselves in a sense, in that I've got an example from someone we worked with recently, and within the first 3 hours of working with them, we'd identified an energy saving of £7,500 a year. And that was just through a behavioural change. It cost them nothing to do that. And that was wasted energy, essentially, which all of this relates back into money, whether it's wasted travel or excessive energy usage that we can identify and mitigate, then all of a sudden we've paid for ourselves 5 times over by doing that. And that's the same for a lot of it's the same for bringing in an expert across lots of different parts of the business, trying to minimize that waste. There's another couple of questions here, so I'll jump onto that. Michael's asking, how do you monitor construction companies? We have several sites ongoing throughout the North and Scottish borders.
Yeah, great. So good question. Construction companies will just have their very own specific scope 3s. So we're currently working with companies that are quarries, that are engineering companies that will have very similar scope 3s, and those like extended kind of supply chain, depending kind of what materials that you're working with, as a construction company. So it's definitely something that we can do and we can facilitate. It will just be very specific and niche to specifically what your sector is. And then there is specific standards that construction companies usually fall under, such as PAS 2060, and very specific things you might be asked in tenders. So if there is very specific questions you're being asked in tenders, that's something we can help you with as well, and we can make sure that whatever calculations we do are useful and are appropriate for your sector and the work that you're going for.
I think some of this, it's all to an industry recognised methodology, but at the same time, there's got to be a level of practical advice and guidance on it to say, what is the important thing is, what you don't want to do is, by having a carbon audit, paralyze yourself because things are trying to get them to the nth degree of 99.9% accuracy. Sometimes if you're 95% accurate and there's meaning behind that, and it's something that's relatively easily measured and managed, like splitting travel. So we have lots of multi-site companies who will have company cars, and we can assign travel or certain vehicles to certain sites or projects. Then we can help break that down and give visualization across the board to see how either similar sites compare like for like, or certain business activities. And actually, just before I move on to the next question, Michael said there that they're being approached more and more in tenders about the carbon reduction plan. And I know, I'll pass it on to you, Elspeth, but I know, for example, there's a standard which has appeared quite regularly in tenders now, PPN 0621, which previously legislation you mentioned before, Elspeth, about ESOS reporting and SECR, and that only applies to people with 250 members of staff or X number of £1 million worth of turnover. But we are seeing now in tenders, particularly of certain sizes, particularly if it's for local government, national government, the nuclear sector, NHS, then everyone, whether you're a one-man band consultant right the way through to a larger organisation, will have a question in there about what is your current carbon footprint and what is your carbon reduction plan. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Elspeth.
No, yeah, I think the thing that we've seen most recently is the nuclear sector, and that has popped up, and it popped up basically overnight. People that were completing tenders within that sector then suddenly realised they needed a carbon reduction plan, and they needed someone to not just measure their footprint, but then work out the solutions and work out the reduction, and they needed net zero goals that were in line with 2050. But like that is exactly why we're here to help, because we do recognise that, and that's definitely something we can help you with, is how to write it into tenders as well once we've done that work.
I've got another question here from David Wilson saying, how do you cope with hybrid working, as in working from home and from the office?
Yeah, so that is something you can calculate now. If you have a percentage of employees that are working from home, there is calculations that we can do that work out the emissions from them working from home, them using their personal electricity, and also we can take obviously that those work from home days off what employee commuting would be. There's also, this is like a wider thing, but we can also talk about businesses, kind of what they've done already, and your backstory and how you've already looked at reducing commitments. So even though hybrid working may have been initially pandemic related, hybrid working, you can now also work into your environmental story as a whole. We can work out how much that has reduced commuting emissions, or how much that is reducing business travel, because more people are having Zoom meetings, not everybody's traveling and working face to face. So yes, we can calculate it. Even if you do have a team that's almost entirely remote or entirely remote, we can look into that for you, and that's something that is calculable.
Just to give you an insight, so we're a team of around about 15 full-time employed, and there's actually 4 of us sat in the office. Everyone else, Elspeth, you're in Glasgow, working from home. We've got a team all over the UK, and that's always been the same pre-lockdown. It just depends on due to the specialism of what we do. But it's important that we haven't outsourced our carbon emissions, if you like, and just not included that. We've got, as part of that, we've got to include any associated emissions for people sat at home when they wouldn't be otherwise, and include that within our report. There's I think there's another question just popped up there actually. It's just some feedback from David saying, thank you. It would be quite variable, so it's good to know it doesn't need to be 100% accurate. And my own personal opinion on this is you've got to start somewhere. And certainly what we've seen with the clients where we've made a start, and they've had that sounding board of someone where they can spend the time, because frankly we're all busy within our own businesses, and this is often something that's desirable, but just people haven't got the capacity to get into it. But by outsourcing it, it's amazing where the quick wins are. Having someone look at your transportation, look at your energy usage, look at your ways of working, and identify where those big carbon savings and usually big financial savings are as well. I think we were working with quite a big organisation at the moment, and it just came up in conversation last week. They've sent some data over, and we've identified that they use a reasonable amount of energy, but it will be a large percentage of their overall carbon footprint because they are an office-based organisation, and they're currently supplied by the worst performing energy company in the country in terms of fuel source. So this company only uses 8% renewables, and actually is one of the very few that sources energy from coal. And it's things like being able to identify that and make that switch. So next time they're looking at their energy contract, actually showing them where a green energy deal is available. Well, I mean, we've had an organisation earlier in this year, and we saved 56% of the carbon footprint overnight simply by changing them to a green energy tariff. So yes, that's a rambling way of saying just make a start. It can always be refined further on, whether the methodology gets better, whether the data collection gets better. I know that's certainly something that you tear your hair out about, Elspeth, is we don't expect SMEs to have very well presented data about their energy usage, about their travel, but by getting involved early and helping them set up some templates, then we can start gathering this data, and we can go back and we can gather historical data, so we can at least get somewhere. And whether in 3 months' time or 6 months' time we revise the figures, at least someone's starting to head in the right direction.